Welcome back to Unreleased. This episode is rather large, so I'm going to cover the rules, then jump right into it. The rules for inclusion are simple. There has to be some proof that the game was in development, be it an article in a magazine, known copy of a prototype, a retail order sheet, an interview with the developer, etc. With that, let's get started. This is Retro Impressions Unreleased Atari Jaguar. Bomberman was in development by Genetic Fantasia and nearly finished, but by '96, Atari deemed the project to no longer be feasible as they stopped supporting the hardware. The real story here is that it was revealed by Jag Explorer Online that Atari never fully secured the rights and had only hoped to convince Hudson to a licensing agreement by presenting a nearly complete game that closely resembled the Super Nintendo release. It's unknown what the thinking behind this was, or if this is what Hudson requested, but the game was nearly complete when it was shelved. It's also clear that Atari hadn't fully secured the contract because as Atari pulled funding and started canceling games, Bomberman remained in development for a short time, dropping the Bomberman license while going forward as an original IP. The game would have remained heavily inspired by Bomberman, having restructured that experience to use Atari characters such as Bentley Bear in place of Bomberman. It was a short-lived idea though, and the conversion never got started before Atari fully pulled the plug. Bomberman was thought to be lost, but its developer rediscovered a build of it in 2014. They've been working to create a stable version, and one of the game's developers is a founding board member of the Video Game History Foundation, so I think it's safe to say, whatever happens going forward will be done with the best intentions in mind. Telegames was the largest third-party publisher for the Jaguar system, so there are a number of games connected to them that didn't release. While the company is still in operation today, they refuse to discuss their involvement with the Jag or give any details on games that didn't release, leaving quite a few questions unanswered. Still, we have information from old interviews, along with recent revelations from people who've come forward that were connected to these projects. With that said, I think it's best to talk about all the games connected to Telegames in one shot. 2 association football games were planned, including European Soccer Challenge, which was a port of the 1990 Amiga release. There's not a ton of info here, but most feel it was cancelled in favor of releasing the more popular International Sensible Soccer. The other was Wild Cup Soccer, which was another Amiga port and follow-up to Brutal Sports Football. This one is known to be nearly complete and had a release planned in early '95. A port of the widely popular '93 Amiga game Graham Gush World Class Cricket was slated for release in February of '95. This game was showcased at the summer '94 CES and was reported as ready to ship. For those who love cricket, this game was highly anticipated, as the Amiga version was very popular and cricket for the most part is underrepresented in video games. Ultimate Brain Games had a January '95 release planned, and a late build of the game has even leaked online. It's a collection of traditional board games such as checkers and chess. Most people speculate that this is the same game later ported to the Game Boy Advance and PSX. While these are essentially the same exact concept, the Jaguar version by far is the best looking of the 3. Casino Royale had a planned June '95 release. It was a casino-style game, and like Ultimate Brain Games, it's speculated this game was converted to the GBA platform under the title Ultimate Card Games. With the Jag version, we know the cart and CD builds were finished, and both offered to Atari if they wanted to pick up the tab for distribution. Spoiler alert, they passed. As per Telegame's official position, all of these games were essentially cancelled due to poor sales of other games they had released on the platform. Poor sales, which they felt was a direct result of the Jaguar hardware selling very few units. It's an interesting position to take in '95, but Telegames would continue publishing new games for 3 additional years. So maybe it had more to do with the development deals surrounding these titles not being as lucrative as others they obtained down the road. There are a few oddities of note before we move on. First off, Telegames was the last publisher on board with the Jaguar, releasing 2 of the 3 officially licensed games for the system that came to market in '97, and the final licensed game, which was Worms, in '98. In 2005, Telegames toyed with the idea of releasing cancelled Jaguar games still in their possession via some form of crowdfunding system. They also went on record stating that some of the unreleased Jaguar games and everything related to them was lost forever due to a tornado that hit their Texas warehouse. What games were lost and which ones remained intact was never disclosed. So is there any truth to this? I'll let you decide, but here are the facts. In April 1994, their warehouse was hit by a tornado, and it was lamented in the press that vintage and contemporary video game inventory had been lost. It's hard to imagine an April 94 event could be related to any loss of any game I'll discuss here, but I'll leave that for you to decide. We're not quite done with Telegames yet. 3 of their most anticipated games were by Elite Studios of Steve Wilcox fame, so let's have a look. Power Slide was a rally-style racer. It was said to be nearly complete, with versions also in development for the 3DO and SNES. A game called Power Slide did release in '98, but they are in no way connected. In 2007, the 3DO version was shown off and slated for aftermarket release on the 3DO by Old Gamer, which is now a division of Super Fighter Team. This never happened though. According to Larry Bundy, Pico later tried picking up these titles for distribution, but this fell apart due to Steve Wilcox, who has a reputation for being hard to deal with, living up to that reputation. Of the 3 versions, the SNES one was the most showcased at the time and has leaked to the public. The 3DO version is known to be in possession of private collectors and may one day see release. The Jag version, if rumors are to be believed, is around 50% complete, though it's never been showcased. Thunderstalker was said to be around 30% complete. It's been verified as being in existence as of the making of this video, but not much else is known beyond who has it. Virtuoso was the final Elite Studio game we will cover, and by far the most famous of all Telegames involved cancelled games. It's best described as Doom, but with a Dog the Bounty Hunter looking fella as the main character. The game famously made EGM's list of the 20 worst games ever made, coming in at number 5, beating out classics such as Superman 64 and Crisscross on the Sega CD. I looked hard and couldn't locate a positive Virtuoso review, hammering home the feeling about this game in the press when it first released. What makes the Jag version well known isn't its reputation of being a port of a notoriously bad game, but that it's been confirmed to be 100% complete. So what exactly happened? Well, it's easy to say that the Jaguar failed, so these games didn't release. However, there's a bit more to this story, and most of the details haven't been made public. When things went belly up with the Jag, Atari started renegotiating deals in their favor, while canceling projects from those who wouldn't accept the new terms, along with projects that didn't appear financially feasible. My understanding here is that Telegames did the same with Elite, and Elite was having none of it. So because of a spat between these 2 companies, which both still remain in operation as of the release of this video, these 3 games remain on the shelf due to fears of legal action should they ever be released for monetary gain outside of the terms stated in the original contract. The final game connected to Telegames is James Pond 3, a Millennium property that Telegames gained distribution rights for on the Jag, where they subsequently contracted with a third party to port the game to that system. The case of James Pond 3 is one of the most curious I've ever seen. The game was said to be close to complete when the lead developer up and disappeared with the code and all assets connected to the port. Telegames had a sizable amount invested, but as the game needed to be rebooted from scratch, they felt it untenable unless Atari was willing to step up and take over the project. Atari declined and development never resumed. With so many people unwilling to go on record, answer questions, or participate in interviews, we've yet to learn exactly who this developer was, why they left with the code, or what other juicy details might surround this oddly unique story. Before we move on, I just want to note that I did reach out to Telegames, which declined to comment, and Elite, which didn't respond. Caves of Fear is another FMV game thought to be developed by the same team as American Hero. As you might have guessed, it relies on that Bandersnatch style, choose your own adventure system of gameplay. There are videos of it online and copies occasionally appear for sale, but unlike American Hero, only about 15 minutes of gameplay is finished. The Center Court Tennis situation is a bit confusing, because Center Court Tennis is a game by Visutech Software released in '91 for PC. It's also an Amiga exclusive by Acid Software released in '95. Hudson Soft also took a stab using this title when releasing the unrelated Center Court Tennis exclusively for the Nintendo 64 in '98. So where does this one stand? Well, besides it being a tennis game, it's not at all related. I'm not sure if this was a working title or what, but Center Court Tennis for the Jag was developed by the famed Zeppelin Games. In the US, Zeppelin Games is well known for their Pete Sampras series, as the Genesis version is the only internationally available game to utilize the Codemaster J-Cart with built-in controller ports for 4-player support without an adapter. From International Tennis released in '92 to the final Pete Sampras game released in '96, the same team essentially handled all tennis games for Zeppelin. Why was Center Court Tennis cancelled? No one knows for sure, but I'm sure based on their track record alone, it would have been a blast. Zeppelin is still in business under a new name, Eutachnix Limited. Centipede 2000 was an RPG reimagining of the original Centipede and Millipede arcade classics. Dark Science originally started development on their own non-related RPG for the Jag called Orc ID. Atari liked what they saw and offered a development agreement requiring a shift in focus to a well-known Atari property. The development contract let them have full access to the Centipede license in a fairly lucrative deal for Dark Science that only required they pay a perpetuity on the first 10,000 copies sold, while Atari covered the development cost. Around 30% of the game was complete when the contract was pulled, leaving Dark Science on their own. Everything connected to this unique RPG was relinquished to Atari, while Dark Science was able to keep the game engine they designed. This engine would be put to use on a new game called Synaptic Core, which they intended on releasing in 2000, but nothing was ever mentioned after the initial press release. The company is still around, but they've never released a game. Around 2013, a member of the Centipede 2000 development team released a 10-second clip showing the game engine in action. It's doubtful we'll ever see much more beyond this. Cheesy is an action platformer which started development for the Jaguar early in the system's life. Development was slow, causing the game to fall a couple years behind schedule, eventually missing the Jag and moving to the PSX. It was only released in Europe and Japan and received mediocre reviews at best. Chopper was a 3D recreation of the game Chopper Lifter. It's another game by Baldi's developer Creative Edge and was said to have an impressive physics engine. Unfortunately, all that's been released is a screenshot and not much else is known. Cisco Heat is an American cop car racing game. It was originally released in 1990 and would have greatly benefited Atari's console had it shipped. The game was showcased on many upcoming games lists for the Jag, but no video or photos were ever shown. It's unknown why the game was cancelled. Commander Blood was a sequel to the 1988 release Captain Blood, both of which are first-person adventure games, though Commander Blood made the leap to include tons of FMV cutscenes. Both games were incredibly unique and arguably revolutionary when released, so Atari acquired the rights to license Commander Blood for release on their system. They already had dealings with the developer as they had released Captain Blood on their ST platform. Atari's typical $200,000 development deal was put in place, paid out over 6 milestones. Cryo Interactive hit the first 3 milestones on schedule, including a showcase at E3 in '95, but they started running into problems with the Jaguar CD unit and the implementation of FMV cutscenes, problems with the GPU's low RAM, Cinepack buffer requirements, and access issue with the CD development kit they had on hand are the stated reasons for the delays. Payment penalties resulting in at least a $50,000 loss for Cryo should they continue on didn't help either. In the end, the game was too advanced for the hardware, and Cryo was too inexperienced to make the proper adjustments needed to push the project forward before it became untenable to continue on with development. By all accounts, the game was essentially complete, minus some missing FMV sequences. Commando was a 3D first-person shooter which took place in 2020, where you controlled a mercenary hell-bent on some sort of revenge. The game was in development with Atari paying $15,000 of a $150,000 development contract. It was shut down due to no fault of its own when Atari pulled funding on every project they could at the end of '95. One oddity regarding the Commando name is that there was also a Capcom arcade game under the same title. This game was ported to the Jag a couple years back and released in very limited numbers, confusing some people into believing it was the same Commando announced as in development back in '94. To be clear, it's not the same game. So Commando being a Capcom property which existed well before this game entered development, certainly meant the 3D Jag Commando, which was developed in France, wouldn't be called Commando had it came stateside. Conan the Barbarian was a very promising brawler, which was only showcased one time at the '95 CES. Carlo Picanti was one of the developers and has stated that the demo was created to demonstrate the system's power and his team's ability to code for the hardware. 2 complete levels were finished with high hopes of securing funding for a full game. Unfortunately, the parent company they worked under called Arcade Zone saw financial difficulty during this time. As Carlo states, "This is the little story of a demo that could have been a game, but stayed only a demo because of bad timing." With the source code confirmed lost, the only thing remaining is footage shot by Glenn Percival at the '95 CES. A grand occurrence for those of us who champion preservation of any kind. I also want to mention that Glenn is still covering games all these years later with his PS Nation podcast. Be sure to check it out. Creature Shock was developed by Agronaut Games, the same studio responsible for designing the FX chip used in games such as Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. Creature Shock was a first-person shooter of the variety that was popular during the mid-90s. The game was released for a number of systems including the 3DO, CDI, and Sega Saturn. Porting this game from the PC to home console wasn't easy, and Agronaut struggled with the Jaguar platform, setting the game's release way behind schedule. The struggle isn't exactly surprising, as while the game wasn't well received, it was still considered a technically impressive achievement at the time of release. It also ported poorly to most systems, with a CDI port famously taking 3 full years to develop. Atari didn't like setbacks, and as they were paying for the port, they tried to strong-arm Agronaut Games into taking a pay cut to continue working on the port. The 2 companies couldn't come to terms, so the project was cancelled and both parties walked away. Good old American Laser Games. I did an in-depth piece on them in part 4 of my 3DO M2 series, so I'll give a quick recap along with the list of games planned for the Jag. Crime Patrol and Mad Dog McCree 1 and 2 were the planned games put into development for the CD add-on. The long and short of the situation was that while these games sold like hotcakes when they first released, the FMV fad was over by the time the Jaguar CD add-on launched. The American Laser division was folded into Her Interactive as they tried to pivot into traditional games, but by '97 that experiment was put to bed so the company could focus exclusively on Her Interactive and games for young girls because that was at the time and still remains profitable. We know so little about Cygnus it's almost not worth mentioning. As far as I can tell, we only have one reference to it even existing. In December of '95, Max Fagan sent out a status update regarding the mass amounts of games that they were going to try to cancel early. Cygnus is on this list, with the mention of $100,000 already being spent on the project and the expedient need to make canceling this project a priority before late December hit. This was because the next milestone was only weeks from being achieved, a milestone that would require Atari to pay the Cygnus developers another $50,000, as the project appeared to be moving along without any issues. Special thanks to Atari Age, JaguarSectorIII, Glenn Percival, and every individual who remains dedicated to preserving documents related to gaming history. It's only because of you that a series like this is even possible. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Your support means the world to me. As always, feel free to leave a positive or negative comment down below. I try to read and reply to everyone and appreciate the opportunity to interact with you all. Until the next episode, to wherever you may be watching, good morning, good evening, and good night. I'm Jenovi, and you've been watching Retro Impressions.